The blue lights of Kalos Prime space station flickered like dying stars through the thick smoke that filled Murphy's cantina. Commander Vexithara sat alone in the corner booth, her 4 arms wrapped around a glass of glowing green liquid. Her chitinous blue skin bore deep scars from battles fought 20 years ago, but the wounds in her mind ran much deeper. The cantina buzzed with conversations in dozens of alien languages. Traders, smugglers, and veterans from across the galaxy gathered, here to drink and forget their troubles. Most avoided Vexithara's table. Everyone knew she had fought in the human war, and nobody wanted to hear those stories. A young Galactic Federation journalist named Kelleran approached her booth. His pale green skin and large black eyes marked him as a Centaurian, one of the newer species to join galactic civilization. He carried a small recording device and wore the eager expression of someone who had never seen real combat. "Commander Vexithara?" Kelleran asked in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "I'm working on a documentary about the human-Zephyrian War. Could I ask you some questions?" Vexithara's compound eyes fixed on him without blinking. Her mandibles clicked softly, a sound that made most species nervous. "Go away, journalist. Find someone else to bother." Kelleran sat down anyway, placing his recorder on the scratched metal table. "Please, Commander. The war ended 20 years ago, but most people still don't understand what really happened. The official reports don't tell the whole story." "The official reports?" Vexithara made a harsh sound that might have been laughter. "The official reports say we fought a brief conflict with a primitive species and reached a peaceful settlement. They don't mention the nightmares." "What nightmares?" Kelleran leaned forward. Vexithara took a long drink from her glass. The liquid seemed to glow brighter as it touched her lips. Most species in the galaxy think humans are weak, small, primitive. They only discovered faster than light travel 50 years ago. Their technology is centuries behind ours. "That's what everyone says," Kelleran agreed. "Humans are barely more advanced than the tribal species on backwater worlds." Vexithara's eyes flashed with something between fear and respect. "That's what we thought too. Admiral Crixtal called Earth a ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. He said we would conquer their homeworld in 3 days and their colonies in a week." She paused, staring into her drink as if she could see the past reflected in its glow. "We were the greatest military power in this sector of the galaxy. Our ships were faster, our weapons stronger, our armor thicker. We had conquered 12 species in the past century. The humans looked like easy prey. But something went wrong," Kelleran pressed. "Everything went wrong." Vexithara's mandibles clicked rapidly. "We sent a fleet of 200 ships to Earth. Standard procedure for conquering a new world. Arrive in orbit. Demand surrender. Accept their submission or destroy their cities until they give up." She took another drink and continued. "The humans received our demand for surrender. Their leader, someone called President Williams, sent back a message that contained only 2 words in our language. Come try." Kelleran's eyes widened. "They refused? A primitive species refused surrender to the Zephyrian Empire?" "Not just refused," Vexithara said. "They seemed excited about it. Our intelligence reports showed increased activity across their military bases. Instead of preparing to surrender, they were preparing to fight." The cantina around them had grown quieter. Other patrons were listening to the conversation, though they pretended to focus on their own drinks. Stories about the human war were rare, and most who had lived through it preferred not to talk about the experience. "Admiral Crixtal was insulted," Vexithara continued. "No species had ever refused our demands before. He decided to make an example of the humans, instead of a quick conquest. He planned to make their defeat so terrible that other species would hear about it and surrender immediately when we arrived at their worlds." "What happened next?" "We attacked 3 human colony worlds simultaneously, New Dakota, Port Liberty, and Haven's Rest. Each world had only a few million human colonists. We sent overwhelming force to each one, 50 ships per world, ground troops, orbital bombardment capabilities." Vexithara's voice grew quieter. "I was a young strike commander then, eager to prove myself in battle. I led the ground assault on New Dakota. The plan was simple. Land, secure the major cities, accept their surrender, and move on to the next target. She laughed bitterly. We knew so little about humans then. We thought they were like most other species. Show them superior force, and they would submit to avoid unnecessary death. Every intelligent species values self-preservation above all else. But humans are different? Humans are not like any other species in the galaxy, Vexithara said. We landed our troops outside New Dakota's capital city. Standard formation, full battle gear, overwhelming numbers. The human defenders had maybe 10,000 soldiers and some civilian militia. We had 50,000 warriors. She paused to finish her drink, then signaled the bartender for another. The silence stretched uncomfortably long before she continued. The humans sent a small group to meet us under a flag of truce. Their military leader was a man called Colonel Jake Morrison. He was smaller than our average soldier, wearing simple armor that looked like it was made from metal scraps. But his eyes, Vexithara shuddered. His eyes held no fear, only calculation. What did he say? He asked if we wanted to surrender. Vexithara's mandibles clicked in what Kelleran realized was nervous laughter. This human, outnumbered 5-1, asked if we wanted to surrender to him. My translator must have malfunctioned, I thought. No rational being would say such a thing. But he was serious, completely serious. When we refused, he simply nodded and said, "Then we'll do this the hard way." He walked back to his lines, and the battle began. The new drink arrived, glowing, even brighter than the first. Vexithara wrapped two of her hands around it while her other two gestured as she spoke. We advanced in standard formation. Overwhelming firepower, coordinated assault, textbook military tactics that had worked on every other world we had conquered. The humans retreated immediately, falling back toward their city. That sounds normal for an outnumbered force. We thought so too. But something felt wrong. Their retreat was too organized, too calm. They weren't running in panic. They were moving with purpose, like they had planned this exact scenario. Vexithara took a smaller sip this time. We followed them into the city, expecting to corner them. In the streets, urban combat favors defenders, but our superior numbers and firepower should have made the difference. Should have. The humans had turned their entire city into a weapon. Every building, every street, every piece of infrastructure had been modified for warfare. They didn't just have soldiers waiting for us. They had turned their entire population into combatants. The cantina had grown almost silent now. Even the background music seemed muted. Kelleran realized that other patrons were openly listening to Vexithara's story. Children who looked too young to fight were carrying messages and supplies through tunnels we couldn't find. Elderly humans were setting off explosives that destroyed our heavy vehicles. Civilians who pretended to surrender would lead our troops into ambushes. Vexithara's voice dropped to almost a whisper. But the worst part was how they fought together. Most species have individual warriors who happen to be fighting the same battle. Humans fight like a single organism with thousands of bodies. They seem to know what each other was thinking without speaking. How is that possible? We still don't fully understand it. Human psychology is unlike anything else we've encountered. They form bonds with their group that override individual survival instincts. A human will die to save another human they've never met if that human belongs to their pack. She finished her second drink quickly. The battle for New Dakota lasted 6 days. We had superior weapons, superior numbers, superior technology, but the humans had something we had never encountered before. What? They had the will to fight until every last one of them was dead rather than surrender their world to invaders. And somehow, that made them stronger than us. Vexithara stood up slowly, her forearms steady despite the alcohol she had consumed. That's enough for tonight, journalist. If you want to hear the rest of the story, come back tomorrow. But I warn you, the tale gets much worse before it gets better. As she walked away, Kelleran noticed that every other patron in the cantina was watching her with expressions of respect mixed with fear. He realized he had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple war story. The recording device continued running long after she disappeared into the station's corridors. The next evening, Kelleran arrived at Murphy's cantina early. He had spent the entire day thinking about Vexithara's words. The idea that humans could defeat the mighty Zephyrian Empire seemed impossible, but something in the veteran's voice convinced him the story was true. Vexithara appeared exactly at the same time as before, walking slowly to the same corner booth. Her blue chitinous skin seemed duller today, and her compound eyes looked tired. She ordered the same glowing green drink without speaking to the bartender. "You came back," she said when Kelleran sat down across from her. "I need to know what happened next," the journalist replied, placing his recording device on the table. Vexithara stared at the device for a long moment. The battle for New Dakota lasted 6 days. By the end, we had lost 30,000 warriors. The humans lost almost everyone, but they made us pay for every street, every building, every room. She took a drink and continued. On the 7th day, the surviving humans gathered in their city's central square. Maybe 200 of them left out of 10,000. They were wounded, exhausted, out of ammunition. Any reasonable species would have surrendered. But they didn't, they sang. Vexithara's mandibles clicked softly. 200 dying humans stood in the ruins of their city and sang some kind of battle song. Our translators couldn't make sense of the words, but the meaning was clear. They were not giving up. Kelleran leaned forward. "What did you do?" Admiral Krickstall ordered orbital bombardment. "We destroyed what was left of the city from space. Every human died." Vexithara's voice carried no emotion, but her hands shook slightly around her glass. "We called it a victory and moved on to the next target. But it wasn't really a victory. We lost more warriors taking one human city than we had lost conquering entire worlds, and the other battles were going just as badly." Vexithara ordered another drink before continuing. "Port Liberty fell after 8 days of fighting. Haven's Rest took 11 days. Each time the humans fought until the very end. They never surrendered, never ran away, never gave up hope." She paused, staring into the cantina's smoky air. "But the worst part was what we learned from their communications. The humans were talking to each other during the battles. Not just military reports, but personal messages." "What kind of messages?" "Fathers telling their children they loved them. Mothers singing lullabies to babies they would never see again. Soldiers writing letters to families on other worlds asking them to keep fighting even after their own cities fell." Vexithara's voice grew quieter. "They knew they were going to die. Every single human in those 3 cities knew they couldn't win. But they fought anyway, because they believed their sacrifice would help other humans somewhere else." The cantina around them had filled with the usual evening crowd, but the area near their booth remained empty. Word had spread that the Zephyrian veteran was telling war stories, and most patrons preferred to keep their distance. After we destroyed the 3 colony worlds, Admiral Krickstall expected the humans to ask for peace talks. Instead, they declared total war against the Zephyrian Empire. Total war? Every human world, every human ship, every human settlement committed to fighting us until one side was completely defeated. They had no chance of winning, but they didn't care. They were willing to die to the last individual rather than accept conquest. Vexithara took a long drink. That's when we realized we were not fighting a normal species. Most intelligent beings fight to survive. Humans fight to protect something more important than their own lives. What happened next? The real war began. Admiral Krickstall requested reinforcements from the Empire. Instead of the quick conquest he had promised, he was facing a species that seemed to grow more dangerous every time we defeated them. She gestured with 2 of her arms while holding her drink with the other 2. The humans started adapting our tactics. They studied our weapons, our ships, our battle formations. Within months, they were using modified versions of our own technology against us. How could they learn so quickly? Human brains work differently than ours. They see patterns everywhere, even in chaos. What looks like random events to us, humans see as connected systems they can understand and change. Vexithara's mandibles clicked nervously. I was reassigned to the 4th Battle Fleet when it arrived to reinforce our forces. By then, human raids were hitting supply convoys throughout our occupied territory. Raids? Small groups of humans in captured or improvised ships would attack our supply lines. They couldn't match our firepower in direct combat, so they changed the rules of engagement. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They would disable our cargo ships instead of destroying them. Then they would board the vessels and take everything useful, including our own weapons and supplies. That sounds like normal piracy. Normal pirates want to profit from their raids. These humans were studying us. Every ship they captured, every piece of equipment they took, every prisoner they questioned. It all went into some vast intelligence network that helped them understand how we thought and fought. Vexithara finished her second drink and immediately ordered a third. 3 months after the first battles, human forces launched a coordinated attack on our main supply depot at Kepler Station. How many ships did they use? 12. She held up 4 fingers on one hand. 12 small human ships attacked a space station defended by 200 Zephyrian vessels. Kelleran's eyes widened. That's suicide. That's what we thought too. But the humans had spent those 3 months learning exactly how our station defenses worked. They knew which weapon systems would target what types of ships, which patrol routes our fighters followed, which comm frequencies we used for coordination. How could they know all that? They had been watching us. Somehow, human intelligence. Operatives had been observing our operations for months without being detected. They knew our procedures better than some of our own officers. Vexthara's third drink arrived, glowing brighter than the previous ones. The attack began at exactly 347 station time. The humans came in fast, using our own patrol routes to avoid detection until the last possible moment. What happened? They divided into 3 groups. 4 ships hit our main weapons array, 4 more targeted our fighter bays, and the last, 4 went after our command center. Each group knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. She took a smaller sip this time, as if trying to make the drink last longer. But the most terrifying part was their coordination. 12 separate ships, fighting in 3 different areas of the station, but they moved like dancers following the same music. They won. They destroyed Kepler Station completely. 200 of our ships, 50,000 personnel, and our entire supply network for that sector. The humans lost 11 ships in the attack. 11 out of 12? The last ship escaped to report what they had learned during the battle. That's when we realized the attack wasn't just about destroying our base. It was about gathering more intelligence for their next operation. Vexithara's compound eyes reflected the cantina's blue lights as she stared past Kelleran into some distant memory. The surviving human ship transmitted a message before it disappeared into hyperspace. Just 2 words in perfect Zephyrian. We're learning. What did that mean? It meant that every battle we fought against them made them stronger. Every tactic we used, they found a counter for. Every weapon we deployed, they found a weakness in. Every victory we achieved taught them something new about how to defeat us. She finished her third drink quickly. Admiral Krixtal was recalled to the homeworld after the Kepler Station disaster. High Command decided that we needed a new strategy to deal with the human problem. What kind of new strategy? They sent Admiral Thexmar with the Grand Fleet, 5,000 ships, the largest military force the Empire had ever assembled. The plan was to bypass human defenses entirely and destroy Earth before the humans could adapt to our new tactics. Vexithara stood up slowly, using all 4 arms to steady herself against the table. Tomorrow I'll tell you about the Battle of Sol system. But I warn you, journalist, that's when we learned that defeating humans in small battles was nothing compared to facing them when they were truly desperate. As she walked away, Kelleran noticed that several other patrons quickly finished their drinks and left the cantina. The atmosphere had grown heavy with tension, as if Vexithara's memories were infecting everyone around her. The recording device captured only silence for several minutes after she disappeared. On the 3rd night, Kelleran arrived at the cantina to find Vexithara already sitting in her usual booth. She had 3 drinks lined up in front of her, all glowing with that strange green light. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted the first glass to her mandibles. "You look troubled," Kelleran said as he sat down and activated his recorder. "I didn't sleep last night," Vexithara replied. "Talking about the war brings back the dreams. In my dreams, I can still hear them." "Hear who?" "The humans. They had a way of fighting that made sounds I had never heard before. Battle cries, commands, signals to each other. Even their screams when they died sounded different from any other species. She took a long drink before continuing. After Admiral Crixtal was recalled, High Command sent Admiral Thexmar with the Grand Fleet, 5,000 ships including the dreadnought Shard of Infinity. I was transferred to serve as strike commander aboard the flagship. 5,000 ships seems like enough to handle any human resistance. That's what we thought. The plan was simple: jump directly to Earth's solar system, destroy their homeworld before they could mount any defense, then hunt down the remaining human colonies one by one. Vexithara finished her first drink and reached for the second. The Grand Fleet assembled at the edge of human space. It was the most beautiful and terrible sight I had ever seen. Ships stretching from horizon to horizon, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. What went wrong? The humans were waiting for us. Her mandibles clicked rapidly. When we dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of their solar system, we found a human fleet already in position. Maybe 300 ships, all of them smaller than our cruisers. She paused, staring at the liquid in her glass. Admiral Thexamar laughed when he saw them. He sent a message to the human fleet commander, someone called Admiral Kate Sullivan. He told her that resistance was pointless and offered to accept her surrender. What did she say? She said, "Come and take us." Then her fleet opened fire. Vexithara's voice grew quieter. The human ships were faster than anything we had seen before. They didn't try to match our firepower. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, striking our outer formations and disappearing before we could respond. That sounds like a delaying action. We thought so too, but something was wrong. The human attacks were too precise, too coordinated. They weren't just buying time. They were hurting us. She took another drink, her hands steadier now. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapon. They had moved asteroids into new orbits, placed hidden weapons platforms throughout the asteroid belt, and somehow weaponized their own planet's gravity wells. How do you weaponize gravity? They used gravitational slingshot maneuvers to accelerate asteroids to incredible speeds, then launched them at our fleet like kinetic missiles. Rocks the size of buildings moving at nearly light speed. Our shields couldn't stop them because they weren't energy weapons. Vexithara's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights as she stared into the distance. Admiral Sullivan split her fleet into dozens of small groups. Each group knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage to our formations. They had studied our standard battle deployments and found every weakness. The Grand Fleet was defeated by 300 small ships? Not defeated, mauled. We lost 800 ships in the first 6 hours of battle. But we still had overwhelming numbers, so Admiral Thexmar ordered all units to close with the enemy and finish them in direct combat. She finished her second drink and started on the third. That's when the humans sprung their real trap. As our ships moved deeper into the solar system, human forces that had been hiding on planets and moons launched a coordinated assault on our rear formations. They had more ships? They had converted everything that could fly into a weapon. Cargo ships fitted with missile launchers, mining vessels carrying improvised bombs, even passenger transports loaded with boarding parties. None of them were military vessels, but they fought like professional warriors. Vexithara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The most terrifying part was their communication discipline. 5,000 Zephyrian ships were filling the comm channels with reports, orders, and battle chatter. The humans maintained almost complete radio silence. How did they coordinate without communications? They didn't need to talk to each other. Somehow human ship commanders could predict what their allies would do and adjust their own tactics accordingly. They fought like a single mind controlling hundreds of bodies. She paused to take a smaller sip from her third drink. Admiral Thexmar realized we were in a trap and ordered the fleet to withdraw. But the humans had positioned their forces to cut off our escape routes. We were surrounded in our own attack formation. What happened to the Shard of Infinity, Famristi? Humans had been studying our ship designs from the wreckage of previous battles. They knew exactly where our weak points were, which systems to target for maximum damage. A group of human fighters broke through our defensive screen and began attacking our engine ports. Vexithara's mandibles clicked nervously. Our point defense systems should have stopped them easily. Human fighters were smaller and less armored. than our own. But they moved in patterns that seemed to confuse our targeting computers. Patterns? They flew like a flock of birds, constantly changing direction and speed in ways that looked random, but somehow avoided our weapons fire. Our gunners couldn't predict where they would be next because they weren't flying in any formation we recognized. She finished her third drink and immediately signaled for another. Then something happened that I still don't understand. The human fighters stopped attacking our engines and instead began targeting our communications array. Why would they do that? They wanted to board us. The humans had learned that destroying our ships was less useful than capturing them intact. They needed our technology, our databases, our star charts. The fourth drink arrived, glowing even brighter than the others. Vexithara wrapped 2 hands around it while gesturing with her other 2 arms. The boarding action began at 13:47 hours, ship time. Human assault troops breached our hull in 16 different locations simultaneously. How many humans? Maybe 200. The Shard of Infinity had a crew of 8,000 warriors, but the humans didn't fight like any boarding party we had ever faced. She took a drink and continued. Most species that attempt boarding actions try to fight their way to the bridge or engine room. The humans split into small teams and began systematically hunting our crew throughout the ship. Hunting? They moved through our corridors like predators tracking prey. Small groups of 3 or 4 humans, each team covering the others, communicating with hand signals and sounds we couldn't interpret. Vexithara's voice grew shakier. The humans seemed to know our ship's layout better than some of our own crew. They moved through maintenance tunnels and service corridors that didn't appear on standard deck plans. How could they know your ship so well? They had been studying the wreckage of our other vessels. Every Zephyrian ship they captured or destroyed taught them more about our technology and design philosophy. They understood our engineering better than we did. She leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting the cantina's dim lighting. But the worst part was how they used psychological warfare. The humans would play recordings of battle sounds through our internal comm system, explosions, weapon fire, death screams from their previous battles. Why would they do that? To terrorize us. Most Zephyrian warriors had never heard the sounds of their own people dying in combat. The recordings drove many of our crew to panic. Some soldiers abandoned their posts and tried to find hiding places. Vexithara took another drink, her hands steadier now. The human boarding teams used our own panic against us. They would drive groups of our warriors into ambushes by playing different sounds in different parts of the ship. How long did the fighting last? 6 hours. 6 hours for 200 humans to capture a ship with 8,000 defenders. By the end, most of our crew was dead or hiding. The humans had taken control of all critical systems. She finished her 4th drink, quickly. I was part of a group of 30 survivors who barricaded ourselves in the secondary armory. We held out for another 2 hours before the humans found us. What happened when they captured you? That's what I'll never forget. We expected them to kill us immediately. Instead, they gave us medical treatment for our wounds and asked if we wanted to contact our families. Vexithara stood up slowly, all 4 arms trembling. The humans who had just killed 8,000 of my shipmates were offering to let us say goodbye to our loved ones. They fought like demons, but they showed mercy to prisoners. Why would they do that? Because they weren't fighting us out of hatred. They were fighting for survival. Once we were no longer a threat, we became people they could help instead of enemies they had to kill. As she walked away, Vexithara called back over her shoulder. Tomorrow I'll tell you about the final battle. But I warn you, journalist, that's when we learned that everything we thought we knew about humans was wrong. The cantina seemed quieter after she left, as if her story had drained the energy from the room. When Kelrin arrived on the 4th night, he found Vexithara sitting with her back to the wall, watching every entrance to the cantina. She had ordered 5 drinks this time, arranged in a perfect line across the table. Her compound eyes moved, constantly, tracking every person who entered or left the establishment. You seem nervous tonight, Kelrin observed as he sat down. After the Shard of Infinity was captured, I spent 6 months as a prisoner of war. Vexithara replied without looking at him. The humans treated us well, but they were always watching, always learning. Even now, 20 years later, I feel like they're still studying me. She reached for the first drink with shaking hands. The capture of our flagship was broadcast throughout Zephyrian space. High Command was furious. They had sent their greatest fleet to destroy a primitive species, and instead we had lost half our ships to inferior technology. What did the Empire do next? They declared total war against humanity. Every ship, every warrior, every resource the Zephyrian Empire possessed would be committed to wiping out the human species completely. Vexithera took a long drink before continuing. But something had changed in the 2 years since the war began. Our intelligence reports were becoming more and more disturbing. The humans were no longer just defending their territory. They were actively expanding into ours. How could they expand during a war? They had learned to use our own captured ships against us. Every Zephyrian vessel they took, they studied and improved. They made our technology work better than we could. She finished her first drink and reached for the second. Human engineering. Teams would strip down captured ships completely, understand how every system worked, then rebuild them with modifications that increased speed, firepower, and efficiency. That seems impossible. How could they improve technology they had never seen before? Human minds work differently than ours. Where we see complex systems that must be used exactly as designed, humans see components that can be rearranged in new ways. They treat our technology like puzzle pieces that can be assembled into better configurations. Vexithara's mandibles clicked nervously. Within 18 months, human ships were outperforming Zephyrian vessels in every category. They were faster, more maneuverable, better armed, and carried crews that fought with coordination we couldn't match. What was the Empire's response? High Command decided on a final solution. If they couldn't defeat human military forces, they would bypass them entirely and strike directly at the human homeworld. Operation Final Dawn would use every remaining ship in the Zephyrian fleet to destroy Earth completely. She took another drink, her hands steadier now. I was released from captivity as part of a prisoner exchange just before the operation began. The humans could have kept me, but they said prisoners of war should be returned to their families, when possible. That seems unusually generous for wartime. The humans understood something about war that we didn't. They knew that treating prisoners well would encourage other Zephyrian soldiers to surrender, rather than fight to the death. Every prisoner they returned carried stories of human mercy back to our forces. Vexithera finished her second drink and started on the third. I was reassigned to the 3rd Reserve Fleet, which was ordered to participate in Operation Final Dawn. 10,000 ships, the largest military force in Zephyrian history. 10,000 ships should be enough to overwhelm any defense. That's what we thought. But the humans had spent 2 years preparing for exactly this type of attack. When our fleet arrived at Earth, we found them waiting for us with defenses that defied every law of physics we understood. She paused, staring at the glowing liquid in her glass. The humans had somehow moved their moon out of its natural orbit and positioned it as a defensive platform. The entire satellite was covered with weapon systems and shield generators. They moved their moon? Not just moved it. They had hollowed it out and turned it into the largest fortress in known space. Every crater contained missile silos. Every mountain peak held defensive batteries. The moon had become a weapon platform larger than our biggest space stations. Vexithara took a smaller sip this time. But that wasn't the worst surprise. As our fleet approached Earth's solar system, we discovered that the humans had somehow created an artificial asteroid belt between us and their homeworld. Artificial asteroids? Thousands of space stations, weapons platforms, and mobile fortresses arranged in overlapping defensive formations. Each one was armed with weapons more powerful than our ship-mounted guns. The humans had turned empty space into a wall of firepower. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Admiral Kexthul, commanding the operation, ordered all ships to advance in battle formation. 10,000 Zephyrian vessels moving toward Earth in the most magnificent display of military might the galaxy had ever seen. What happened when you reached the human defenses? The humans didn't wait for us to attack. As soon as we came within range, Every single defensive platform opened fire simultaneously. 10,000 targets, each one being hit by dozens of weapons at the same time. Vexithara's compound eyes reflected the cantina's blue lights as she stared into the distance. The coordinated fire was perfect, not a single shot was wasted. The humans had calculated exactly how much firepower was needed to destroy each of our ships, and distributed their attacks accordingly. How could they coordinate so many weapons? They had created some kind of central command system that could control thousands of platforms at once. But it wasn't just a computer system. Human operators were making real-time adjustments to every attack, adapting to our movements faster than our own crews could respond. She finished her third drink and reached for the fourth. In the first minute of battle, we lost 3,000 ships. In the second minute, another 2,000. Our return fire was hitting the human platforms, but they had shields and armor that absorbed damage better than anything we had ever seen. Where did they get such advanced defensive technology? They had reverse-engineered everything they captured from us over 2 years of fighting, then improved it beyond our original capabilities. Our own weapons and shields, perfected by human engineering, were being used against us. Vexithara's voice grew shakier. Admiral Kexthul ordered the remaining ships to break formation and attack individual targets. He thought scattered assault would overwhelm their coordination systems. Did it work? It made things worse. The humans had prepared for that tactic too. As soon as our ships scattered, hidden human fleets emerged from behind planets and moons throughout the solar system. We found ourselves surrounded by enemies we hadn't even detected. She took a long drink before continuing. The human ships moved like they were controlled by a single mind. Perfect coordination, perfect timing, perfect execution of battle plans that must have taken months to develop. How many Zephyrian ships survived? Less than 1,000 out of 10,000. The greatest military force in our history was destroyed in 6 hours by a species we had dismissed as primitive savages. Vexithara finished her fourth drink and started on the fifth. But the most terrifying moment came when Admiral Kexithul tried to surrender. He broadcast a message on all frequencies, offering to withdraw our remaining forces and negotiate a peace treaty. What was the human response? Nothing. For 10 minutes there was complete silence from the human forces. Our surviving ships held position, waiting for some kind of acknowledgement of our surrender offer. She paused, her hands trembling around the glass. Then every human weapon in the solar system stopped firing at exactly the same moment. Thousands of platforms, hundreds of ships, all going silent together. The coordination was so perfect it seemed supernatural. They accepted your surrender? A single human voice came over the comm system. Admiral Kate Sullivan, the same woman who had defended Sol system during our first attack. She said only 4 words. The war is over. Vexithara emptied her fifth drink in one long swallow. The surviving Zephyrian ships were escorted to a holding area near Jupiter. No weapons were pointed at us, no threats were made. The humans simply guided us to a safe location and waited. Waited for what? For our high command to contact them directly. The humans had defeated our military completely, but they wanted to negotiate with our government rather than dictate terms to our soldiers. She stood up slowly, using all 4 arms to steady herself against the table. Tomorrow I'll tell you about the peace negotiations and what we learned about human civilization. But I warn you, journalist, the real surprise wasn't how well they fought. It was how well they understood peace. As Vexithara walked away, Kelleran noticed that the entire cantina had fallen silent. Every patron was staring at their drinks, lost in thought about what they had just heard. The recording device continued running in the heavy silence that followed her departure. On the 5th night, Kelleran arrived to find the cantina nearly empty. Word had spread throughout the station that the Zephyrian veteran was finishing her war story, and most patrons had chosen to drink elsewhere. Only a few brave souls sat at distant tables, nursing their drinks in nervous silence. Vexithara sat in her usual booth, but something was different about her tonight. She had only ordered 1 drink, and her hands were steady. Her compound eyes looked clearer, as if telling the story had somehow lifted a weight from her shoulders. "This is the last night," she said, as Kelleran sat down and activated his recorder. "How do you feel about finishing the story?" "Relieved. These memories have Been trapped in my mind for 20 years. Maybe sharing them will help other people understand what we learned about humans. She took a small sip from her drink and began speaking in a steadier voice than she had used all week. After the Battle of Sol system, the surviving Zephyrian ships were held near Jupiter for 3 days. We expected the humans to demand our complete surrender or threaten to destroy our homeworld. What did they do instead? They sent a diplomatic ship to meet with our fleet commander. Not a warship, not a military vessel. A small civilian transport carrying human negotiators who wanted to discuss peace terms. Vexathara's mandibles clicked softly. The lead negotiator was a human named Ambassador Paul Grant. He came aboard our flagship unarmed with only 2 assistants. No guards, no weapons, no threats. That seems dangerous for them. That's what Admiral Kexthal said. He asked Ambassador Grant why he was willing to trust his life to enemies who had been trying to destroy his species for 2 years. She paused, remembering. Grant said that the war was over and enemies could become friends if both sides were willing to talk honestly about their mistakes. What kind of peace terms did the humans offer? That was the most surprising part. They didn't want territory, tribute, or reparations. They wanted something we had never expected. They wanted to understand why the war had started and how to prevent future conflicts. Vexthara took another small sip. Ambassador Grant spent 6 hours talking with our officers about Zephyrian culture, government, and military philosophy. He asked questions about our expansion policies, our treatment of conquered species, our reasons for attacking human space. What did you tell him? The truth. That we had seen humans as primitive and weak, easy targets for conquest. That our empire had built its power by defeating species that couldn't effectively resist our military. She looked directly at Kelrin, for the first time all week. Grant listened to everything we said without judgment or anger. Then he asked one question that changed how I think about the entire war. What question? He asked if we had ever considered that other species might not want to be conquered, even if we could provide them with better technology and more efficient government. Vexathara's voice grew thoughtful. No Zephyrian had ever asked that question. Before, we assumed that conquest was a natural process. Stronger species absorbed weaker ones for mutual benefit. We never considered that freedom might be more important to some species than security or advancement. How did the negotiations end? The humans proposed a treaty that surprised everyone. They offered to return all captured Zephyrian ships and technology in exchange for 3 things: an end to Zephyrian expansion through conquest, the establishment of diplomatic relations between our species, and the creation of a joint commission to study better ways of resolving conflicts between civilizations. She finished her drink slowly as if savoring the last drops. Admiral Kexthal was shocked. He had expected demands for surrender, not offers of partnership. He asked Grant why humans were willing to trust a species that had tried to destroy them. What was Grant's answer? He said that humans had learned something important during the war. Fighting could teach you about your enemy's weaknesses, but peace could teach you about their strengths. Vexathara's mandibles clicked in what Kelrin now recognized as genuine amusement. The treaty was signed 1 week later on Earth. I was part of the Zephyrian delegation that traveled to the human homeworld for the ceremony. What was Earth like? Beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Every human city we saw was designed for both peace and war. Parks and schools next to weapons factories. Theaters and museums built with defensive walls. They had created a civilization that could enjoy peace but was always prepared for conflict. She gestured with 2 arms while keeping the other 2 clasped in front of her. But the most impressive thing was how they treated our delegation. The same species that had destroyed our greatest fleet welcomed us as honored guests. Human children gave us flowers. Human artists performed music for our entertainment. They weren't angry about the war. Some were. We met human veterans who had fought against us, families who had lost loved ones to our attacks. But even they treated us with respect rather than hatred. Vexathara's voice grew softer. I spoke with a human woman named Carol Jackson, whose husband had died defending New Dakota. She asked me about Zephyrian families, about our children, about our hopes for the future. She wanted to understand us as people, not just as former enemies. How did that make you feel? Confused at first. In Zephyrian culture, enemies remain enemies until one side is completely defeated. The idea that former enemies could become friends seemed impossible. She paused, looking around the nearly empty cantina. But I started to understand something about human psychology. They don't fight because they enjoy violence. They fight to protect the things they love. Once the threat is gone, they prefer to build rather than destroy. What happened after the treaty was signed? The real education began. Human scholars came to Zephyrian space to study our culture and history. Zephyrian researchers went to human worlds to learn about their technology and social systems. Vexathara's compound eyes brightened. I volunteered to stay on Earth as part of the cultural exchange program. I spent 5 years living among humans, learning their languages, studying their philosophy, trying to understand what made them such effective warriors and such generous peacemakers. What did you learn? That everything we thought we knew about humans was wrong. They're not primitive, they're adaptive. They're not weak, they're flexible. They're not simple, they're focused on what matters most to them. She leaned forward, her voice becoming more animated. Humans have a concept called family that extends beyond blood relations. They form emotional bonds with friends, colleagues, even strangers who share their values. When they fight, they're not just defending territory or resources. They're protecting their extended family. Is that why they fought so hard against your invasion? Exactly. Every human who died defending a colony was dying to protect people they might never have met, but considered part of their family. Every human who fought against impossible odds was buying time for other members of their species to survive and continue the struggle. Vexthara stood up slowly, but her movements were steady and confident. That's why we started calling them ghost warriors. They could appear anywhere, fight with impossible coordination, and disappear before we could retaliate. But they weren't ghosts. They were a family working together to protect their home. What's the current relationship between humans and Zephyrians? Better than anyone expected. Human military advisors help train Zephyrian defense forces. Zephyrian engineers work with human scientists on joint research projects. Our species have become allies instead of enemies. She walked around the table to stand next to Kelleran. But I want you to understand something important, journalist. The war taught us that humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy when they're threatened, but it also taught us that they're the most generous species when they're at peace. Why are you telling me this story? Because other species need to understand what we learned. Humans don't want to conquer the galaxy. They want to explore it. They don't want to rule other civilizations, they want to learn from them. But if you threaten their family, they will fight with a determination that can destroy empires. Vexathara placed one of her 4 hands on Kelleran's shoulder. The Galactic Federation invited humanity to join as equals because they understood this lesson. It's better to have humans as friends than to risk making them enemies. As she walked toward the cantina's exit, Vexathara called back over her shoulder. Remember this story, journalist. Share it with anyone who thinks humans are primitive or weak. They're not the strongest species in the galaxy, but they might be the most dangerous when they have something worth protecting. The cantina fell, completely silent after she left. Kelleran sat alone with his recording device, understanding that he had captured something more than just a war story. He had documented the birth of humanity's reputation as both the galaxy's fiercest warriors and its most unlikely peacemakers. Outside the cantina's windows, human ships could be seen docking at Kalos Prime's commercial ports. Traders, diplomats, and tourists from Earth, moving freely among dozens of alien species who now knew to treat them with respect. The Ghost Warriors had become the galaxy's guardians, and their legend would endure long after the last veteran of the human Zephyrian War had passed into memory.